record button. Welcome everybody to our class today, Contemporary Issues on April 25. We're going to talk today about the race and police issue because this last week has been so dominated by that and the trial of the Minneapolis police officer who was convicted of murder, which is unusual today. I found in my research on the internet, very unusual for there to be many convictions of police officers for their actions, and there's reasons for that, and we will go over that. It's a very interesting topic, I think. So before we get started, announcements, mute yourself please in the lower left corner of your screen as usual so we can keep background noise down. When you're talking, please unmute, of course. And we are recording this today for future playback. And please be kind to our speaker, who is me today, and to each other, of course. And be aware not to dominate too much in your comments if you are excited by our topic, as we occasionally have, and people want to comment so often. Let other folks have a chance to get into the discussion. And we'll do plenty of discussion today and sharing of our thoughts on this issue. And how's everybody doing before we get started? Any news or prayer concerns? Something new this week? We're just talking with Ron Puning about he was carrying signs in front of a gun shop about stop gun violence. So that's an interesting thing going on. Also, of course, related to the whole race and police issue, our gun violence issue going on. And Ron, you had about 20 people there that were carrying signs.
A very kind and peaceful group. Very good group of people.
Great.
Almost all of them retirees and older.
Oh, really?
Like me, yeah.
Huh.
Where were they from, Ron? All over metro area, or just
Yeah, all over the metro area.
various churches, or how did they get gathered?
Yeah. It was not a church. It was Colorado Ceasefire, which is Tom Mauser's organization.
Okay.
Very good. Okay. I'm going to jump into it here and talk about several main questions this morning on this whole issue, starting with why the Minneapolis officer was convicted when so many are not, and then also about a few statistics about police killings in America, and then also let's talk a little about white supremacy and media coverage of this whole issue that has been especially hot in the last year since the George Floyd killing in Minneapolis. I'm going to start by sharing my screen here. I'm not going to share too many photos with you this morning, but I will share a few as we discuss. And of course, we have seen, can you see that picture okay? We've seen that picture of Derek Chauvin with his knee on George Floyd's neck. But this picture that I found also had his Chauvin's wife attached to this famous picture. Those of you that don't know, this lady from Laos was Derek Chauvin's wife for 10 years. She divorced him since the incident has happened, and ABC News had this on their website, and so I pulled off this picture, which some folks say is germane to the issue because, of course, the whole minority aspect of police brutality, and that Chauvin was married to this lady that was a Laotian immigrant for 10 years, and she was 2 years ago won the Mrs. Miss Minneapolis contest. And also ABC News reported that both of them were charged also with felony tax evasion for not filing federal income taxes from 2016 to 2019. So that was another part of the story that a lot of us have not heard about, that behind the scenes of that issue going on. So why was Chauvin convicted when so many have not been? Let me read you a little bit about from CNN, an article from CNN, and then let's discuss it. CNN says that experts have noted this week that it's really rare for police officers to be convicted, especially of murder charges. Experts point to several factors, including laws that protect an officer's right to use force, the advantages of powerful police unions that provide good attorneys for officers, and even jury pools that tend to side with the police for various reasons. A criminal justice professor at Bowling Green University says that juries are very reluctant to second guess and judge the actions of police officers in violent street encounters, especially when the officers have to react to split-second changing circumstances. There have been at least 140 law enforcement officers arrested and charged with murder or manslaughter charges since 2005. But only 7 of those officers were convicted of murder charges. That's 5% of those that were charged. The current standard for police use of force is a 1989 U.S. Supreme Court decision that says force must be, quote, objectively reasonable, and that officers are often forced to make split-second judgments in circumstances that are rapidly evolving. And for this reason, juries often are reticent to convict officers for an objectively reasonable decision under those circumstances. The Washington Post database said that on-duty police officers have shot and killed more than 5,000 people since 2015. And the vast majority of criminal cases result in convictions through guilty pleas, but many police officers do not plead guilty because they know that they can be successful in trial much more often than the average defendant is. Police defendants have also benefited from juror sympathy due to the public perception that their job is inherently dangerous.
Steve, would you say that again? 5,000 people?
Yeah, 5,000 people have been shot since 2015.
By
Shot and
police
killed more than 5,000 people since 2015. Washington Post database has said.
throughout the United States. That's not
Yes,
worldwide or anything. That's an incredible number.
that is, yes, in the U.S.
The data I would like to see, and I think it's just darn high number, is how many police citizen stop interactions there are every day in this country. There are thousands. So if even 0.1% of those interactions results in a, shall we call it a physical altercation, we're going to get shootings and violent interactions. And it must be pretty terrifying to be a police officer, particularly if you're alone or even with a partner, and it's a dark night on, let's say, Santa Fe Drive, and there's a van with 3 people in it, all young males, and you stop them. It's got to be a nervous interaction.
Yeah, USA Today reported the data that there are around 10 million arrests by police in the U.S. every year, and about an average of 27 weapon attacks on police officers per day. 27 weapon attacks or threats to officers per day. And of course, we only see a couple of those pulled out in highlighted in the media um, for the officers and their choices during that 27 incidents per day. The reasons Chauvin was convicted, I read, was really three main points. It was not first, it was not a split-second decision. We know that he had his knee on the neck for more than 9 minutes. Number two, there were videos, multiple videos that told clearly what the situation was, and that's often not the case in officer brutality cases. And third was, of course, there was intense pressure nationwide and focus on this case that probably um, played some role in the outcome also. But those three were what also broke the blue wall of silence, as they call it, the police support of each other in cases like this. They don't usually testify against each other, but in this case, it was changed. What do you think about that? Let's open it up for comments. Were you surprised at the verdict? Were you pleased at that verdict? How do you think it played out?
I was surprised at the verdict, and I am very surprised that any of the officers actually testified. And I don't know why, but my guess, just based on human compassion, is they saw what we saw. They realized that, again, my opinion, that he passed a point of confusion and stress and being intimidated. And my feeling is all the frustrations and insults and fear that Chauvin ever felt as a cop were under his knee at those 9 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe other cops felt that, understood that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and in a few minutes, when we talk about reforms that have come about from this case and others, we'll mention the duty to intervene. Police, when they take their oath of office, also agree to a duty to intervene if they see um, police brutality going on. They have a legal right, a legal obligation to stop brutality when they see it by other police officers.
I never knew that,
That
never heard that.
we don't hear
Wow.
much about that, and that's also one of the charges against the other three officers that were there with Chauvin, is that they did not intervene when it seemed to be clear that it would have been appropriate for them to do that.
That's in view with the in sync with the whistleblowers concept for healthcare and other professions. You're obligated as a professional to report a colleague doing something unethically. Yes.
Anybody who's ever choked or swallowed some water will realize, and most of us have had that experience in our life, how desperate and how easy it is to block our breathing process. I remember one incident where I inhaled, it could have been more than a tablespoon of water, it went down the wrong pipe, and I had trouble breathing for 20 minutes. I was kind of scared. So putting a pincer movement on somebody's neck for 9 or 10 minutes, and particularly he got feedback from the victim saying, I can't breathe. He sure was calloused.
And that was one of the things in the trial that they said was it was pretty clear that he violated that Supreme Court directive to use only objectively reasonable force to control the suspect.
Steve?
Yes, Linda, go ahead.
I think when the other officers go on trial, one of the things that will be in their favor is the fact that I think two of them were brand new on the job.
Oh my God.
And
And
Chauvin
the
was
fact is,
their
one of them, it
supervisor.
was their very first day.
Oh,
Wow.
I can see where they would be hesitant to call their superior to task.
yes, he was not just an equal officer, he was their supervisor that day,
Mm,
training them.
mm.
So that may play in their favor also. Interesting. Well, another statistic, of course, I wondered too about the statistic of how many whites versus blacks are killed by police officers each year in America. And just basically last year, it was reported in 2020 that whites, 457. We've got a bird squeaking on the background. If you're not speaking, please mute yourself so we can stop that bird from tweeting.
I think that might be me.
You're outside, Joyce. Thank you. Last year, there were 457 whites killed by police officers, and there were about half as many blacks. 241 blacks killed last year by police officers in America. And that's extraordinary because blacks make up only 12.5% of the US population, yet they were half as many fatalities as the white population. And then Hispanics were half again as many as blacks with 169. So, and then additional ones were only 28 different races. So whites was about 500 last year, blacks about 240, and Hispanics about 170 people killed. And of course, that shows how much higher the black fatalities are per capita than they are whites. And raises the question, of course, of why is that? And the police say that it is because they do greater patrolling and intervention in black areas where the crime and violent street actions are higher. That is what I was reading, was they are claiming that it's because the need, the interaction is so much higher in black neighborhoods. What do you think of that reasoning? Diane, sure, go ahead.
I'm amazed. And I think this is causes a lot of additional Black men and women being killed in the end. I have a friend, and I think everybody has a story. But my friend had dropped off her two boys. I may have said this before. Stop me if you know the story. But had dropped off her two boys for a scout meeting, and she was waiting in the car for them during the meeting, and police officers showed up, questioned why she was there, and had to actually, they made her get out of the car, go to the house, and verify that she had her children at that meeting. And it was very embarrassing, as well as the person hosting the scout meeting. But again, we have so many, that's oftentimes part of the story, is that, and for George Floyd, sure, he had that was counterfeit, and yet would those people in the store have called if it was a white man? Yeah, I think that's very much part of the escalating number of Black people being arrested, and of course they're afraid too. If they get taken to the prison, to the jail, they don't know if they'll come out alive, and I think that's a lot of the resistance that they have too.
Well, we've certainly been hearing much about that in the media about why they are concerned and how often they are stopped for no reason. Driving while black has become a phrase that we've learned as white people. We don't have to worry about that, but um, I have a good friend from high school who's black and says it happens to him all the time, just for driving when he may match the description of someone they're looking for. Well, let's move on to the reforms that have been instituted or tried, introduced at least since the George Floyd incident happened. In the modern era, CNN reports that in the modern era of the last few years, really started in the 2010s when a series of shootings of unarmed individuals by police officers made national news. The biggest one of that we may remember was in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014 when Michael Brown was shot in the street and was unarmed but got into an altercation with police. That led to Barack Obama starting a task force on 21st century policing reforms, he called it, and it made numerous recommendations, including calling for body cameras on police. Then in 2016, there was a multiple shooting of police officers in Dallas. You may remember outside there was protest, and somebody then opened fire on police officers. And there was an interesting quote by the Dallas mayor at that time that said, "This is ironic because we did community policing before any other large city had done it. We had de-escalation training for our officers in Dallas before anyone else. And we had the lowest number of police involved shootings of any major city in the country. And yet our officers were attacked protecting people who were exercising their freedom of speech." So that was an interesting case. A few of the reforms implemented across the country, introduced. In Colorado, last year in June, the Colorado General Assembly passed a bill that banned the use of chokeholds, banned the use of tear gas without first allowing people to disperse, removed the qualified immunity defense from police, and required all officers to use body cameras by July of 2023. The bill was signed by Governor Polis last June and will also prevent officers who are fired for misconduct from being rehired by other departments. So it did several things, and we haven't heard much about that since that was passed. Also, for our member who's from Toronto, Susan, I noticed that there was a mention in the media about last June, the mayor of Toronto put forth a proposal that called for his city to do alternative models of community safety response to incidents where neither violence nor weapons are an issue. He called for mental health professionals to ride along with officers where there was not a violent confrontation going on. So that was another one that, of course, has been introduced in other American cities too. Currently in the U.S. House, the Justice and Policing Act of 2021 is a police reform bill that was drafted by Democrats in Congress and introduced on February 24th of this year. It aims to combat police misconduct and excessive force. Its bill passed the House and it has not yet been voted on by the Senate. It would do four main things. It would prohibit the issuance of no-knock warrants, which of course was in the news because of the killing of the Breonna Taylor young girl with a no-knock warrant. It would, number two, change the threshold for permissible use of force from the reasonableness standard currently to only when necessary to prevent death or bodily injury. So it would change that main law that is being applied currently from reasonableness to only when necessary to prevent death or bodily injury. Number 3, it would mandate that federal officers use deadly force only as a last resort and that de-escalation must be attempted first. And number 4, it would require federal officers to all have body-worn cameras and for their cars to be equipped with dashboard cameras. So those are some of the Colorado and federal efforts. What do you think about those? Had you heard about those? Do you think there was enough focus on that? Anybody not heard about those at all? Joyce, you're muted. If you'd like to comment, that's okay. Unmute.
Thank you. Yeah, get rid of the bird. I'm watching my cat. Anyway, I had not heard that. And I'm like surprised. This sounds reasonable. It sounds reasonable to protect the police officers. So they have a very structured area in which to respond. And something that is occurring to me as we chat, and this might just be, you know, an online training that does nothing, because I've had plenty of those at work, but something where you have to have some face-to-face mental fitness for policing assessments regularly, like an interview. What's been hard this year? What's been easy? What's challenged you? In a way to help these people do better, because we have so many guns and so many people walking around with uniforms and big cars. They're protected already. And I think there's some fear factors with these, being a police person. And it's scary. I don't want to be one, but I don't want to rely on violence and force to protect me against a bad guy.
It's difficult.
Yes, I
What a
like,
hard time to be a cop. Can you imagine being a
Yeah,
policeman today? Wow.
yeah.
Gene, go ahead.
Joyce's comments there, right on, Joyce. I think also going back to Toronto as a possible model here, the nomenclature and the vocabulary might be modified. We're certainly doing that on issues of race and gender. And a rose is a rose, I realize, by any stretch of the imagination. But instead of calling them the police, which is interpreted in the vernacular in some parts as the pigs, rather than the police or the Marine Corps, officers of the peace, accenting of the peace, like the bobbies in England. You know, neutralize the military aspects. And you're quite right, Joyce. We want better screening, certainly civilian review boards, building the community and so forth. But I think the naming of the Corps, CORP, is important, because it would denote intent and purpose. So officers of the peace might be something also to be considered. I've not heard that issue brought up, but perhaps that might be of some help at this point.
I agree with that change of name.
And in your message, Eugene, you just said officer. And that tells me if I'm stopped by one of them, they are an officer. If they ask me to step out of the car, I'll just do it. I haven't done anything. I'm not worried about that I'm going to be in trouble, but I can do that. If they're an officer, I can do what they ask me to do. I was taught by my parents all my life that they are hired to be officers, to be in charge, and you need to do as they ask you.
Well,
I think many people don't, they think I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Well, then the police are put in a corner where they need to do something else because this person, and that spreads. If the police just let everybody by that says, I don't want to do it, I'm not going to do it. Well, then they're totally unuseful.
Well, let me pick up on that a little bit as far as the officer concept is concerned. Our daughter was traveling to KU, Steve, uh, you know, as a college student on Highway 70 interstate and was pulled over. And it was, yes, it was nighttime. And she was terrified. And some of the questioning and so forth that took place. But civilians can take the badge number, and I don't think civilians also at this point need some additional training and education with respect to what your rights are as a citizen and not getting out of the car. There's some protocols there that I think probably are open to for continuing education. Perhaps I could go along with getting our driver's license, perhaps.
Mhm. Yeah, there are things like that also. But it doesn't
I'm
surprise
reminded-
me. Go ahead, go ahead.
Finish.
Not my turn.
No, I was going to say to the lady, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but you're white and they're black. And so often when we see these incidences happening to Black men especially, for instance, was it in Atlanta when this Black man fell asleep at,
Yeah.
I don't know, was it some drive-through McDonald's? And somebody called 911. Why didn't somebody from the store simply wake him up, ask him to advance? No, they call 911 because they were probably was talking to the cops and just they were having this conversation, and all of a sudden they're arresting him. Why did they arrest him? He simply fell asleep, but again, we go back to driving when Black. That's the big difference. And my friend, like I mentioned about Frances before, she said, I didn't ask for the color of the skin. And it's really true. She lives her whole life as a Black woman, and it colors all of her relationships. And we can't even understand it because we're white, we're privileged white. And I think that's the difference. For instance, the military person that was stopped, supposedly he did not have registration. He had a brand new car and he had it to his window, but he was stopped. They pulled guns. Now, if he was white, there's no way that would have happened, but he had a uniform on. He would not get out of the car because he knew what would happen. He probably would end up being killed. And for what? He hadn't even done anything wrong. He was simply going home from work as a military person with a uniform on, which is just, I think, surprises all of us because we know about doctors that are Black who will even run with their doctor's uniform on because just to protect them, if they were in civies, they would be stopped. It's just impossible for us to understand what Black people
But we are learning.
going
This
through.
has been an education process for a lot of us about what they are feeling and what they are going through. Let me read to you just a short bit from a USA Today story talking about policing in other countries. It talks about a documentary series in 2014 called The Norden. And the filmmakers took an LAPD police captain to Sweden and Norway to see his reaction to how policing is done there. It says the captain was shocked and disturbed by what he saw as the softness of the Nordic policing culture. In Finland, when he found out that arrested persons are called customers, he said, I really don't understand that. We call them suspects in America. In Sweden, he was disturbed to find that police trainees are allowed to wear normal clothes during their police training, which is 2 years long. He said, I thought 6 months training was long for me to get into the LAPD. In Norway, he was horrified to learn that police are unarmed normally and have to get special permission to use a firearm. He said, I don't understand the rationale for any police department that tells me if I'm to be deployed in the field, I have to keep my gun locked in my car. And he said that, but no doubt it would be impossible to fully replicate the Nordic policing policy in America, which has 400 million guns in private hands. Shootouts really do break out all the time, and it is a different situation, a different country. But it was good to learn what other countries do with different policing models. So that kind of goes to what Gene was talking about, and the way many cities now are trying to have mental health professionals ride along with police and do the de-escalation before the police have to intervene with their badges and their guns on their bodies. What do you think of those models? Police don't carry guns. They call the people they meet customers. You think that'd work in America?
I like the fact that the approach here sounds like I'm not going to be suspicious about you and call you a suspect until I talk to you and hear what you think you're up to, or hear from you what you were doing, instead of relying on my negative assessment, my gun, my violence-oriented approach to anyone I'm going to accost.
Mhm.
In Switzerland, their approach is a little different. Their police people are armed. I guess his nephew is a police officer there. But Switzerland, they issue all their people, the males, guns because, like, during the Second World War, they were the military. All citizens were. So I had this discussion with my sister not too long ago about the AK-47s here, and she's very pro-gun. I was really surprised, and she says that she has a gun, and when she lived in Switzerland, she lived there for almost 30 years, that the altercations the police got into there, you just didn't hear about. They weren't publicized like they are here. So, you don't think of Switzerland as being, you think of them being more like Sweden or, one of these other places, but they're more like the US. I was really surprised.
Mhm.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah, Jim.
I'm just wondering if you have any data, or if anybody else has any data about how many policemen are killed or wounded in the line of duty during those same periods that you were talking about. 5,000 people got killed by the cops. I was wondering how many cops got killed.
Very good
wounded.
question. I did not look that up, but that's a very good question. And they fear for their lives. That is why they
I know.
That's
they
true.
often pull their gun, and like the lady and they make mistakes, like the lady who shot the young boy that was in the car thinking she is grabbing her taser.
In last week's
Well,
lesson,
that's a rare case, though.
Hmm.
That case where the police lady thought she mixed up her gun with her taser,
Mhm.
and that's rare. That's a rare story.
I don't
That
see how
isn't
that's even
mainly what our
possible.
problem is.
in last week's lesson, there was a chart that showed the number of police officers killed by assault weapons over about a 3 or 4 year period. And about 20% of officers killed by guns are killed by assault weapons. And
That's 20%.
about
What about the
20%.
other 80?
Well,
are they killed?
Quote, regular guns, handguns.
Yeah, that's what it is mainly, I think.
Yeah.
More of
But you don't have
that.
it, you don't have any numbers or anything like that about how many officers are killed annually or anything like that, Ron?
I'd have to look at that chart again. It's a high number.
Steve,
Go
I
ahead.
want to respond to your question about how we felt about like mental health people going with our police officers. And I heard that there was kind of an experimental group that was working with Denver Health, and that they did have a mental health group going out with the police officers on all of the domestic calls. And I don't know a lot of detail about it, but it was reported on Next News. And apparently the outcome of what had happened at that point was very successful, and that the de-escalation was very positive. And they were finding that arrests did not need to happen because the mental health worker was with the policeman. And so they were finding that they did not need to make an arrest, but
Yeah.
instead they were able to successfully work with the person. And then the second comment I wanted to make was that I also heard something about an experimental thing that was happening, I believe it was in Berkeley, that they were going to have a group of police officers that were not going to be carrying guns. And there were just certain types of calls that they were going to go out on. Do you know anything about that? Have you heard of that at all?
No, I don't, but
Okay.
Berkeley would be the liberal place to try it. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
Interesting.
Aurora,
Yeah.
Aurora, Colorado has been doing something for several years. It doesn't get much press, but it's popular in a number of the retirement communities in and around Southeast Aurora. And that is that a number of the older Americans in and around Aurora go out with the police officers on their tour of duties. Tour of duty. That sounds military, doesn't it? On their patrols, surveillance in the community, and so forth. And times for coffee. They have a special time for coffee with your police for the kind of interaction. It kind of gets at that consumer of services, or in other words, we're interacting. We're also accountable, but we're also letting people see how we do our work. So I think anything that moves in the direction of more of an interactive, shared experience, accountability, perhaps can de-escalate some of the rhetoric and tension that we all feel around this issue.
They have that in Lone Tree. We meet once a month with our police officers, and chat with them, and sometimes more frequently.
Very
And
good.
I do know there's some senior volunteers that ride with them.
Yes.
I
Yes.
had a friend in 1980 who worked about 6 months in the emergency room in Miami, Florida, as a medical assistant. And he told me there were an incredible number of cases where they would bring people in, males almost always, with gunshot and knife wounds on Friday and Saturday night in particular, that were drunk, belligerent, and would try to assault or even do bad things to the medical personnel who were trying to help them and address their issues. So I think we could all get an education if we saw how bad some of the cases are with people that are drunk, on drugs, or enraged, and what they can do, and the pressure it puts on officers.
yeah.
That's why our nurses at Denver Health refer to it as the knife and gun club on the weekends, particularly Saturday night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of knifings or, killing with knives, especially amongst young people. It seems like, you don't need a gun if you got a knife.
Yeah. Let me read to you a very brief section of a Peggy Noonan opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. She is a Republican represents pretty, I think, a balanced thought, but she does come often from the conservative side too. And here's just part of what she said. She said the Chauvin verdict was a good thing, needed, and will react to America will react by making improvements. But she said, let's consider the cop point of view too. If you're a cop today and you pull your gun in the current atmosphere, you know you're going to be assumed by the press to be guilty, whatever you do, and you'll probably be on video for whatever you do. Because the police are the official foe now of the media in many cases. People are living stressed lives and they need the police most. Even Black people, of course, call the police when they need help. We should be concerned about the democratization, about officers who will leave the force, about young people who could become great cops but will never today because of the current situation. We should be concerned that more policemen will come to see their only priority as protecting their jobs and themselves from public shaming if they act with their gun. If I ran the world, we wouldn't be diverting funds from the police. We'd be spending more time to expand and deepen their training, literally lengthen it by a year or two, deepen their patience, their knowledge, and the way they react. They came from us. They came from modern America that's jittery, jacked up, and broken. They don't come from health and stability families as people often did 50 years ago. They don't come from something that's solid, and they don't come from a world that went out of its way to teach them manners, morals, and faith. All the cops and the perpetrators, they come from us. They need more from us, not less. And good cops need more respect and gratitude. Thought that was an interesting way to say it.
I love the part. I love the part you read when she said they come from us. How true.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminds me of the recent issue here in Colorado when the 70-some-year-old small woman, I guess, had a mental issue, and they tackled her. They didn't talk to her, and it's on television. That's the type of approach and force they used. That's ridiculous.
I saw
That's
that,
crazy.
Joyce, and she was leaving a Walmart and walking home,
Yeah.
73-year-old
Yeah.
white woman with dementia. And when they stopped and talked to her, she appeared normal at first to them, but she wouldn't respond to their request to get in the car or to talk to
Right.
her more, so they put her on the ground and handcuffed her. But if they had a mental health professional with them, maybe they would have figured out her dementia quicker.
Even if she didn't have dementia, that's a terrible way to treat a woman.
Oh, yes.
An older woman.
Yes, Joyce, you're so right. We have a nephew who's a graduate of the Academy of LAPD, and his intent for going into law enforcement was more like a first responder and more like a social worker. He really wanted to help people. And if any of you have ever been in a situation where you've had those first responders come to your house or to be of assistance, they are most and can be most helpful. And but this concept of they come from us, yes, they do come from us, and therefore we're accountable to each other, is a very healthy concept to mull over, I think, right now as we discuss this very contemporary issue.
But police, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've gotten to know several officers in the area where I live because I've had coffee with them once a month and hear about their jobs and hear about what's going on in the neighborhood. And I admire them greatly. I don't call them cops. I call them policemen or police officers out of respect. And also, I'm wondering how many of you are really wanting any of your grandchildren to go into that profession or encouraging them to go into that profession. They're part of us, as someone said, but how many of you are hoping that you have grandchildren that will become police officers?
I saw something in the last week, and I don't know where this community was, but kind of along those lines, Judy, going down to the first levels of relationships between law enforcement and the community. The local police districts, houses, whatever they're called, had a reading group, and it was called Pizza Night. I think it was like every Friday after school. Any of the elementary children in that neighborhood were invited and flocked to the police house, and they would read with each, with a police officer, and then share pizza, have all the pizza they wanted. And it grew in that area so that there are more places too. But it, from the very early levels, it affects that interaction.
Most oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I just loved it.
If you want to learn a little bit more about this profession, several of the OLLI classes, Osher Lifelong Learning classes, they've had Sheriff Spurlock and different ones teach a whole session about their training and their issues and the laws that they wish there were. And so if you ever get those OLLI catalogs, see if they may have one of those again. I took one a couple years ago, and Sheriff Spurlock was the coordinator of it.
Thank you.
I have read in the last 6 months, and I was trying to remember where I read it, and I think I agree with it, but and as things develop, I think I'm agreeing with it more and more. But that one of the, as a trite saying, that the police have started or have evolved to the point where they are relying for authority to do their job with the gun on their hip and not with the badge on their chest. That their authority comes from their badge, not from their gun. And as more and more policemen rely on the gun to provide authority, then we have more and more problems. Now, I know there's an awful lot of holes in that saying, but the more I think about it, the more I think that this is and I wish I could remember where I read it. Give it some kind of authority.
It fits right into our session for next week, Steve. The unmitigated, uncontrolled access to firearms, guns, which is so epidemic in our country that it's one gun against the other. It's high noon in so many cases all the time. It's the uncontrolled use of firearms universally throughout our society, which is really the bigger issue.
Good point, Gene.
I think it's interesting that if you look at the FBI statistics for law enforcement deaths and the Law Enforcement Memorial Officers Fund, they also do a report on officer deaths. The deadliest decade in the history of policing is, when do you think that would be? Like, if you had to guess. It's the 1920s. So
fewer guns.
Yeah, so that was when more officers died. But in the last 10 years, 1,100 officers have been killed in the line of duty. And a very small percentage of that was felonious assaults. There's car accidents, heart attacks. There's lots of different ways that officers die in the line of duty. And then 2020 is turning out to be one of the most deadliest years for cops, not from guns or car crashes, but from COVID. Being exposed. And so like 164 police officers died in 2020 from COVID related deaths. So we were asking earlier, so I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, thank you for looking that up, Shannon. Yeah.
Hey, Shannon, where did it say how many cops died from gunshots?
I didn't look at the different breakdowns, but you can go to the FBI. It says that they break it down between they said only for, like in 2019, there were 89 law enforcement deaths, but only half of those died from felonious acts. That's all it says. So it doesn't, so
So
I'm assuming that's.
45
I'm assuming that's
45 from some type of violence against them.
right. And that was in 2019, but they have all sorts of different breakouts. That's on the FBI website.
Okay.
Well, we've just got a couple minutes left. This has been a good discussion and fair to both sides, I think. I'm so proud of us for being able to do that and have a good discussion, acknowledging the problems on both sides. I read you a little clip from the Wall Street Journal on the conservative side. Now let me read a little clip from a Berkeley professor who is Black, trying to explain how he feels today. He says, America really has a history of being afraid of Black people. And if you're white and you don't know any Black people and you live in the suburbs, I can see why you're afraid of Black people. You think of the police as doing a dangerous job, and they do. But if you're Black, when you think of police, you think they bring danger. He said, we live segregated lives and we live in different stories in America. Lifting up Black people as we're doing today, or lifting up Native people or Latinos or Asians, doesn't mean we're trying to put down white people. It does mean there's a history in America of being organized around white supremacy, and you're learning what that means. We've got to come to terms with that. We've got to have a better narrative where everyone, every group can thrive and we can get along better together. I thought that was a great way to say it.
I agree.
Where there's
I
this
think someone
underlying,
should say amen after that.
amen.
amen.
That's
I think that's-
right.
I think that's a prayer.
That is a prayer.
Mhm.
Good way to say
Amen.
it. It's such a hard issue, hard on both sides. And I think both sides are trying to understand, but we are coming from different stories, different understandings.
And the other thing that all of us need to say is, you know, Pogo Possum, a lot of you are the age that you remember Pogo back in the 1950s. And Pogo said, we have met the enemy and they is us. And I think when we look at all of our faces here, we're all pretty white. And we're all pretty far south out of the center city.
Yes, we are. Any final thoughts before we sign off here?
I want to thank you for the awareness of so many issues that you bring up. And I think this group of people is just so fabulous to hear your insight, your contributions. I want to do this more often,
Oh, thank you, Joyce.
but I appreciate the opportunity to join you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Thank you, everybody. I pray that we can have peace in the world. And thank you for being with us. We'll see you next week when Representative Jason Crow joins us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.